Every spring, when there are no flocks of birds in the sky, Chip takes his family to the wetlands to collect bird eggs. The family boards their small boat together and rows to their destination. Upon landing, their first task is to place some dry hay in a bucket. Then each person takes a bucket and starts searching for bird nests. However, today they are out of luck, as the high tide blocks their path, and they must return along the river. The Alaskan tundra hides many rare treasures. Suddenly, Timok finds a sturgeon arrowhead with a small hole at the end, now clogged with mud. Ancient people would tie a fishing line to this end to catch sturgeon. The barbs on the arrowhead firmly hook the prey. The arrowhead, long buried and slightly corroded, will be preserved at home by applying a layer of clear glue to seal its surface, making it a valuable collectible. Back on the boat, they head to another area where many seagulls are perched near nests, indicating plenty of eggs. Chip finds a nest with 4 eggs, likely goose eggs. His daughters also make their own finds. Kooten, the youngest, has a close call with attacking seagulls after disturbing a nest. They test the collected eggs by placing them in water. Those that sink are freshly laid. Chip finds another nest with large goose eggs. This activity is much like an Easter egg hunt for the family, full of various surprises. After the winter thaw, the upstream flow brings many items to the wetlands, sometimes even fossils. There's always a slight risk, as cotton almost gets stuck in the mud, which smells terrible and can leave a person stinking for days. The egg collecting continues. A nest with only 3 large eggs suggests more will be laid soon. Smaller nests usually contain seagull eggs. This year's yield is less than last year's 200 plus. Perhaps they came too early. At sunset, Chip cooks the eggs wrapped in damp grass by the campfire, creating a deliciously soft and sweet dish, richer in protein than beef. For a unique flavor, they sprinkle some chili powder on the eggs. In the morning, Chip and his eldest son, Doug, see a herd of deer near their camp. They delay their approach until the deer swim across the river. Doug uses his shotgun effectively, ensuring a hit. Chip also bags a deer. They tie the game to the sides of their boat and clean the animals in the river, saving time and effort compared to land hunting, without risking harm to other reindeer. After cleaning, they return to camp with their catch. Agnes and the daughters await on the shore, eager for the meal. The first parts of the reindeer they consume are the heart and tongue, simply cooked with onions and water. As they enjoy their meal against the setting sun, they appreciate their hard but rewarding and adventurous lifestyle. A few days later, a small boat quickly approached them. It was Doug, Chip's eldest son, bringing 3 seals to the family. Seals are a precious resource throughout Alaska, and only local indigenous people have the right to hunt them. They are also a major source of fat during the winter. Living in the coastal town of Deering, 50 kilometers away, Doug is skilled at hunting such prey. Agnes, along with her daughters, quickly sharpened their ulu knives. They would hang the lean meat to dry and store it, while the fat was cleaned and rendered into oil. Seals may look small, but their fat layer is thicker than that of a 300-pound pig. These 3 seals could yield about 40 gallons of oil. Chip and Doug came over as well. Since Chip is not indigenous, he does not have the right to process the seals. Rendering the oil also requires a lot of firewood, which naturally fell to him to collect. The 2 then headed out in their boat to gather driftwood along the riverbanks. This spring's floods hadn't brought much wood, so they had to search along the shore. They soon found a dry log, with one chopping with an axe and the other sawing with a chainsaw. The tree was dry enough to use immediately. Back at camp, Agnes and Timok continued to process the seal oil. Once they started, they had to process all the fat at once to prevent it from leaking through any gaps. Chip and Doug found another dry log, with the axe clearing branches and the chainsaw cutting it to length. Their ancestors had lived this way for thousands of years, obtaining everything they needed from the sea and land. This lifestyle could sustain someone comfortably anywhere in Alaska. The men returned to camp with a boat full of firewood. Agnes had nearly finished processing the seals, and now they needed to clean and render the oil. Chip took advantage of the calm weather to take Doug back home. The 50-kilometer journey each way would take about 5 to 6 hours. With nothing much to offer in return, they gave Doug half a bucket of collected bird eggs. After saying goodbye to Doug, they started boiling the fat. 5 large barrels of it, enough to last them a good while. Meanwhile, Agnes taught Carol how to handle seal skin. They used a wooden frame to stretch the skin, threading ropes through the edges and tying them to the frame. The tension had to be just right to avoid uneven thickness in the skin. The drying process would take about 4 to 5 days until the seal skin was hard and set. If there was time later, Agnes planned to make vests or boots, or even decorative white canvases from it. These could be traded for essential supplies like gasoline, bullets, and food. After several days of continuous work, it was time to reward themselves. This summer, they not only had dried deer meat, but also seal oil. They prepared a meal of reindeer meat with seal oil, supplemented with apples and onions for a balanced, healthy, and tasty dish. Tomorrow, they would start their journey back to Norvik, bringing all the food they had gathered to prepare for the harsh winter. When the snow began to melt, the Hailstone family arrived in Kivalik to hunt and fish. Early in the morning, Chip, eager to hunt, dragged his sled out, watching the geese flying joyfully in the sky, wishing he could shoot one down. Unlike before, today Chip had 2 helpers, his eldest son Doug, and T-Mac's boyfriend Kevin, both from the neighboring village of Deering. They bundled some bushes together, laid some straw, and covered it with a large white cloth to create a bird hunting blind. Geese gradually landed in the nearby clearing, and everyone checked their weapons. Chip loaded his antique shotgun, and they mimicked the calls of the geese to attract them. This method didn't work well on pairs, but it was effective in luring solitary geese. A surprisingly successful tactic. A lone swan circled overhead, and Chip, with his antique, prepared to shoot but missed, the gun proving ineffective at that distance. To increase their hunting range and success, the 3 men set up another blind. Kevin, a native of the area, was experienced in hunting, but his first 2 shots missed. Relying on better equipment, within minutes, Kevin successfully shot a large goose with his scoped .22 caliber rifle. T-Mac was responsible for retrieving the game. This was their first goose of the year, weighing about 7 or 8 pounds. Kevin placed it in an open area, propping its head with a stick to make its calls more realistic. Using the goose as a decoy, they quickly attracted 2 more. The 2 men stood up and fired, hitting one unlucky goose that was wounded and couldn't fly away. They simply needed to stretch its neck, adding another decoy to their setup. Later, Chip and Agnes joined them, pleased to hear that both geese were caught by their son-in-law, whom Chip was growing increasingly fond of. They returned to their own blind to continue hunting. Before long, a goose landed on the lake, and they waited, using the live decoy to attract others. Soon, 3 more geese flew towards them. This time, it was Chip's turn. Whether by luck or fluke, he managed to shoot one down, to the cheers of Agnes and the incredulous looks from the young men. By evening, the young men had caught 3 geese each, and Chip won, totaling 7 Canada geese, enough for a hearty meal for the family. They started back to camp with their game, plucking the geese while they were still warm. In a few hours, it would be T-Mac's birthday, named after the geese that returned during his birth, which means goose in Eskimo language. Next came the exciting part of cooking. High-quality ingredients often only require simple cooking, paired with seal oil for a delicious meal. Lean but not dry, oily but not greasy, the family roasted the goose by the campfire, enjoying a brief respite after a busy day. As the temperature rose and the snow on the ground lessened, Chip and Agnes seized the last days of winter to hunt reindeer for their spring and summer food supply. They rode their snowmobile across the river in front of the camp, where a large group of reindeer was running on the hillside. For residents of Alaska, obtaining meat doesn't require a trip to the supermarket. The wilderness provides everything they need. Shedding their gloves and tossing aside their glasses, they pulled the trigger to secure their desired meat. Watching the game fall, they rode their snowmobiles to the site to quickly process the catch. With the snow soon to melt completely, snowmobiles would soon be out of use. They aimed to catch a few more reindeer to secure enough food for the summer. On their way home, they encountered another group of reindeer, conveniently saving them the effort of searching. Chip drove the snowmobile to the side of the herd, targeting the adult males, as most females at this time were likely with calves. Agnes pulled the trigger again and successfully made the shot. Seeing the prey down, they rode to collect their game, quickly gutting it and loading it onto the sled. The 2 reindeer meant they wouldn't have to rely solely on hunting birds for meat. In the morning, the snow was still firm, but by afternoon, it began to show signs of melting. The sled, heavy with 2 reindeer, posed a challenge, especially with the river in front of the camp where the ice was getting thinner by the day. Chip and Agnes started to cross the river, but soon their sled fell into the water. Chip revved the engine, trying to pull the sled out, but the heavy load made it difficult. The sled and its load sank into the river, prompting T-Mac, who was waiting on the other side, to shout for her brother. He came with another snowmobile to help, and they slowly dragged the vehicle back onto the ice. Just as they were about to reach the bank, the ice under Chip cracked, dropping him and the vehicle back into the water. Though it was spring, the river water was still very cold. With the previous experience in mind, they cautiously removed the sled first, then dragged up the snowmobile, and finally, the day's catch of 2 reindeer. Wet and cold, Chip and Agnes hurried to warm up and change into dry clothes to avoid hypothermia. After changing, they checked the snowmobile's condition. Water had entered the exhaust, but not the engine. Chip turned the snowmobile over. It still started, indicating no serious damage. The next day, the Hailstone family packed up their camp. With the snow melting quickly and the flood season approaching, their current location would soon be underwater. They moved their tents to higher ground. Agnes and her daughters packed the items to be moved, while Chip collected firewood. After the flood, all the driftwood in the area would be washed away. He went to the coast where the waves had brought in plenty of usable wood, and quickly cut enough with his chainsaw to fill a sled, then hurried back to camp. Every minute later increased the risk on the river. After half a day's effort, they successfully moved their tent to higher ground. From here, they could avoid the flood and have a view of the surrounding game. A herd of reindeer grazed nearby. Having secured 2 reindeer, Chip and Agnes quietly watched the herd, content with their supply. As the temperature continued to rise, they planned to butcher and dry the reindeer meat, which could be stored for a long time, used as travel provisions, or eaten with vegetables and berries. After a night of nature's quick freeze, the entire musk ox was harder than a brick. Today, they were to return to Norvik. Due to Agnes's snowmobile malfunctioning after a coolant leak and subsequent issues, they had to use one snowmobile to transport the meat and tow the broken one back. This journey home was a 150-kilometer trek across the frozen tundra. To lighten the load on the front vehicle, Chip removed the belt from the broken snowmobile, allowing it to glide in neutral. They also left extra fuel in the tent behind, planning to return here to spend the summer. They had hoped to trap some fur animals, but the broken snowmobile and the meat harvest, coupled with 5 daughters waiting at home, signaled it was time to head back. They hoped the return journey would be without incident. After several hours, they reached a cabin, their midway supply station, marking half the journey. Chip refueled the snowmobile, which had consumed more fuel than expected and moved slower than planned. He prayed the engine would hold up after hours of driving in Arctic conditions, which had numbed them completely. They entered the cabin to warm up with hot coffee and give the snowmobile a rest. After a brief break, they prepared to set off again, with 3 hours of daylight left, hoping to reach home before sunset. The journey would be easier once they left the uneven tundra for the smoother ice-covered river. However, after several rough patches, the towed snowmobile overturned. Agnes quickly signaled Chip to stop, and they checked the damage. There was no major issue, except the windshield was shattered, adding to the snowmobile's woes. With no better option, they had to drag it back anyway. Alone on the frozen tundra, they had to solve all problems by themselves. As the sun neared the horizon, Chip and Agnes hurried along, knowing the dangers of traveling at night on such rough terrain. For them, a broken snowmobile was better than returning home without meat. As the last traces of dusk faded, they finally returned to their community. Their daughters, excited to hear about the musk ox, looked forward to fresh heart and tongue. With the moon in the sky, Chip prepared soup with carrots, heart, and tongue, while Agnes played cards with the daughters. Once the cooking was nearly done, they sliced the heart and tongue, gathering around to enjoy the delicious meal, a perfect blend of meat and vegetables. Kutan especially relished her pot of hot soup, thoroughly enjoying her meal. The next day, Agnes and her 2 daughters prepared to head to a new campsite. Besides essential survival supplies, they planned to go ice fishing, a skill Agnes learned from her parents during her childhood. Chip brought some traps to catch fur-bearing animals. The family of 4 set off on their snowmobiles, arriving at the cabin by nightfall. On the way there, Chip spotted a moose carcass near the riverbank. Such sites often attract fur-bearing animals looking for food. Agnes and the daughters took care of setting up camp while Chip drove alone to the location of the moose remains. It was unclear whether the moose had been killed by wolves or had drowned, but its body was partially frozen in the river. Chip set 2 traps there, hoping to catch some fur-bearing animals. The next day, he drilled several holes in the ice, and the family of 4 sat down to fish. Hours passed without a single catch, and the wind grew colder and stronger. Before it got dark, Chip rode his snowmobile to check the traps he had set the night before. One had been triggered, but it hadn't caught anything. The strong winds that night were expected to reach 9 to 10 on the scale, potentially burying the moose carcass under an additional 30 to 50 centimeters of snow, rendering the traps useless. Agnes and the daughters also came back empty-handed, making the ice fishing trip seem fruitless. Every year at this time, Chip and Agnes would visit their winter hunting ground. What was different this year was that Chip could also use antique weapons. He took out a 5mm Hawken rifle, poured some black powder into it, and forcefully struck the ramrod to compact the powder. Today, he planned to hunt musk ox with this old weapon, a challenge as daunting as using a melee weapon like Roland the Great. Years ago, Chip had been given a suspended sentence for a felony after providing a false alibi for a friend in a non-violent crime, which restricted him from using modern firearms. Over time, he was allowed to use pre-1898 manufactured firearms. However, after several attempts, the old gun failed to fire, proving unreliable. Fortunately, he had brought a backup weapon that could fire successfully, but it lacked rifling, so he had to be very close to the game to have a chance of success. Then the 2 set off on their snowmobile. Musk oxen usually gather in herds in the western mountainous region of Kivalina to avoid the cold and strong winds of winter. These creatures, about the size of a male reindeer, can produce twice the amount of meat as reindeer. Chip and Carol parked their snowmobile on a hillside, spotting a group of dark figures in the distance. Chip used binoculars to confirm, but the distance and visibility made it hard to distinguish whether they were reindeer or musk oxen. Only after Agnes looked did they confirm it was a herd of musk oxen. Approaching the herd in such an open area without cover was unlikely, as they were too far away and out of shooting range. Consequently, Chip and Carol had to drive to Deering to repair his malfunctioning weapon. Musk oxen, unstartled, do not move quickly, so their tracks would still be visible upon their return. In Deering, they quickly found Jerry, a well-known gunsmith in the area skilled at repairing antique rifles. After explaining the problem, Chip dismantled the weapon. They cleaned every part and discovered that the lubricant at the bottom of the barrel had frozen. After replacing it with antifreeze lubricant, the rifle seemed ready. Outside, the rifle fired without a hitch. If Chip could get within 100 meters of the musk oxen, there was a good chance of success. They hurried back to where they had seen the herd, which hadn't moved far from the mountaintop. Chip donned a white camouflage suit to approach discreetly. When threatened, musk oxen form a circle to protect the cows and calves. They didn't see Chip as a threat, even as he got close. Chip didn't hesitate. He crouched, aimed, and fired, hitting one of the musk oxen. He signaled Agnes to bring the snowmobile closer. Such powerful animals are hard to bring down with one shot, so they followed slowly, waiting for the injured musk ox to lag behind before firing again. Chip removed his white jacket to apply pressure to the herd, as musk oxen, like other herd animals, look out for each other. It was possible to chase them all day. Seizing the opportunity, Chip fired again. The injured musk ox staggered a few steps before collapsing. It was one of the larger ones in the herd, with long fur and plenty of fat. They began butchering the animal, undeterred by the cold, windy weather. The joy of the hunt warmed them. Spotting and harvesting a musk ox in previous years was rare. This catch could yield about 250 to 260 kilograms of beef, along with a musk ox hide and head. After cleaning the innards, they loaded the sled. Instead of heading home immediately, they decided to first deliver some meat to Jerry as a thank you for his help. Fresh ingredients often just need simple boiling to be enjoyed. Sharing the experience of obtaining food with village elders is a joyful occasion. Enjoying a meal where the meat is fatty yet not greasy, lean yet not tough, signifies a good day. But today was special because it was musk ox meat they were eating. The next day, Chip took a can of gasoline and set out to perform a comprehensive check on the snowmobile. His method of fueling was somewhat wasteful, as the spills could have fueled the snowmobile for a couple of miles. In winter, the snowmobile was their only means of transportation, so maintaining it in good working condition was crucial. After inspecting the chassis and the belt, which were fine, He took it for a test drive. The frozen river served like a highway, and Chip could speed up to 80 miles per hour, covering 20 to 30 kilometers without any issues. Meanwhile, at home, Agnes and her eldest daughter, Timok, were making coats from the fur they had gathered. For the Hailstone family, using captured fur for clothing was a tradition and key to surviving the harsh winters. They sketched the rough shape of the coat on the prepared fur, which was actually gray wolf skin. A coat required at least 3 wolf pelts to complete. According to Agnes, nearly every Inuit woman owned a coat made of wolverine fur. They had only one piece of wolverine fur, but plenty of wolf pelts, so Agnes planned to use the wolf fur as the main material and the wolverine fur for trim and decoration. Coats made from these materials could keep them warm even in temperatures as low as -50 degrees Celsius. They cut the fur along the sketched lines with a small knife, constantly trying it on to avoid any mistakes with such valuable material. After cutting the desired pieces, sewing began. High-quality fur often required only basic stitching techniques, but the entire process could take several hours. Agnes taught her daughter various stitching techniques she had learned from her mother, and now they could manage on their own. To ensure better sewing, the fur's hair was initially placed inside. Once everything was set correctly, they turned it right side out. While Chip was out test driving the snowmobile and bringing back some firewood, Agnes came over wearing the homemade wolf fur coat, which looked as luxurious as any high-end brand. Interestingly, wearing it felt like instantly gaining 200 pounds, and from a distance, one might mistake her for a brown bear due to the hat. But in terms of warmth, it was unquestionably effective. Early in the morning, Chip and Agnes were busy clearing snow from a luxurious cabin that they planned to move to a new site. Before they could transport it, they had to dismantle the roof to prevent the structure from becoming top-heavy and potentially falling apart during the move. If not for their dog, restrained by a chain, who could have contributed a bit to the effort, the task was left entirely to the Hailstone family. Each member took a corner, lifting off the roof and then breaking it down into 3 pieces for easier transport. Before reaching the river, they used 2 snowmobiles to tow the cabin. Towing such a load was quite easy for the snowmobiles. Once on the river, which acted like a highway due to the ice, Chip took over the towing with 1 snowmobile for better maneuverability and control. The 2 sped along the river, one leading and the other following, transporting the large cabin more smoothly than anticipated. However, an incident occurred. Agnes's snowmobile developed a coolant leak. Chip, unaware, continued forward, leaving Agnes staring in dismay on the ice. It wasn't until he had traveled a few kilometers that he returned to her location. Unable to repair the snowmobile in the wilderness, they decided to leave it there temporarily, while they continued to transport the cabin to its destination. By the afternoon, they had reached the destination, but they still needed to transport the roof and complete the assembly. They also planned to bring back the broken snowmobile on their return journey. The round trip of 60 kilometers took a full day. The next day, Chip and Agnes set out from Norvik with the cabin's roof, arriving at their destination by late morning. They quickly reassembled the cabin to its original form, aiming to make it habitable by nightfall. The most challenging part was repositioning the roof. They used levers to lift the roof onto the structure and then slid it into place, also securing the surrounding area with canvas for wind and rain protection. The final step was to move the cabin onto the foundation they had prepared in the autumn, which was now buried under snow. Fortunately, the snow formed a natural slope. They secured straps to nearby bushes as anchor points and gradually pulled the cabin forward with a winch. Each tightening of the winch moved the cabin closer to its correct position. After positioning and securing the last pieces of canvas, the long-term residence was established. Since they did not have a heating stove installed yet, they could not stay overnight in the cabin just then. Early in the morning, Chip and Agnes were butchering a deer thigh. Their 4th and 5th children drove home on an ATV after school, bringing back the family's mail. The Hailstone family lives in Norvik, Alaska. Their 2 sons have already moved out, leaving only their 5 daughters at home. Agnes is a full Inuit and a native Alaskan. They spend the entire year hunting, fishing, and gathering food. The mail brought by their 4th child included a deed from Agnes's parents, detailing the exact location of the property by river and land coordinates. Moreover, the land has permanent usage rights, allowing legal inheritance by their children. Joe, their youngest son, happened to be passing by, so the 3 decided to take a boat to explore the new land and let him choose a spot for his homestead. In addition, they planned to build a permanent residence on their own land. After arriving, they found that the land on both sides of the river belonged to Agnes. They walked along the riverbank looking for a suitable place to set up camp, and soon found several wooden stakes left from a previous tent setup, indicating an ideal location. They then went to another river to gather materials for the foundation, finding many fallen, weather-worn trees ready to use without branches or bark. After cutting them into lengths that could be transported by boat, they quickly filled the boat with wood. Back at the homestead, they continued to clear the shrubbery with a chainsaw. For the indigenous people living here, the land is essential for survival. After clearing, they dug deep pits for the foundation and placed the collected logs in them. The foundation needed to be about 60 centimeters high, so any excess was sawed off. Once the beams were placed, the foundation was completed. The next day, Chip prepared materials to build a cabin. He planned to create an oversized sled on which the cabin would be mounted. Once heavy snow arrived, they could tow it with a snowmobile to the prepared foundation. This sled was more like a floor for the house. Chip, Agnes, and their eldest daughter, Timak, flipped the base and added plastic sheets to reduce friction with the ground. Since the river wasn't frozen and there was no snow, Agnes and Timak went fishing instead. They secured one end of a fishing net with stakes and towed the other into the middle of the river by boat. Within minutes, they caught their first white salmon of the day. The net would stay in place for a while. The next day, they returned to check the net and saw ripples from the fish inside. It looked like another bountiful day. They quickly began to retrieve the net, pulling up 4 to 5 fish from the same spot. Besides the white salmon filled with roe, there were also a few red salmon. Despite the cold weather, the joy of the catch warmed their hearts. One fish was too rotten to eat as it had spawned. They returned home with several large basins full of fish. At home, Chip had completed the cabin's framework. Once the ground froze, they could tow it to the right spot. Next, they enjoyed a meal of freshly baked white salmon, served simple to highlight its natural flavor, accompanied by dried reindeer meat and bread. The Hailstone family gathered around the table, relishing the self-sufficiency. The roe-filled white salmon nearly moved Kutan to tears. Once winter set in, fresh white salmon would have to wait until next year. In the snowy town of Norvik, Chip and Carol went out to collect some willow branches. The snow-covered ground made it the perfect time to set traps for catching wild rabbits, and it was also a good opportunity to teach his daughter some hunting skills. Collecting willow is not difficult, but care must be taken not to poke one's eyes with the branches. Willow is chosen for trap making because the local rabbits feed on willow bark. Setting snares on these branches helps the traps blend in with the environment. After collecting a bundle of willow branches, the two prepared to head back. Rabbits rarely venture out during blizzards, but they emerge to make paths once the storm subsides. Like many animals, rabbits tend to follow the same routes. To set the snare, they wrapped one end of the wire around the willow branch 2.5 times and fashioned the other end into a slip knot. The key to snare placement is the height. Too high, and the rabbit escapes. Too low, and it might catch the foot instead. Carol watched intently, and then started making her own snares. They made 35 in total, unsure how many rabbits would be caught. Once the storm stopped, Chip and Carol moved along the river, planning to lay a 3-kilometer line of traps. They were quickly drawn to tracks in the snow and set a snare in the bushes beside the path, using 2 sticks to guide the rabbits into the trap. When the rabbits passed by again, they would hopefully catch some. After setting up the spot, they continued forward, placing a trap wherever they found footprints. Every year when the river freezes, the Hailstone family engages in this activity. Whether they get to enjoy fresh roasted rabbit depends on their luck. Early the next morning, the two rode their snowmobile to check the traps they had set the day before. The traps were placed along the sides of the road, making it easy to see if they had caught anything. The first trap was empty, but the second had caught a rabbit. However, the rabbit was still alive, not caught by the neck. Chip, unfazed, quickly and efficiently broke its neck. The next trap had caught something, but a fox had gotten there first, leaving behind only traces of blood and rabbit fur. It appeared the rabbit had been stolen last night. The two rushed to check the remaining traps. Those without a catch were left in place, as they still had potential if checked regularly. Another trap yielded a rabbit, already frozen stiff, likely caught earlier in the night. Carol now knew how to catch rabbits too. She could ride the snowmobile to set her own traps, and eventually, she could teach these hunting skills to her children. The remaining traps were empty, but 2 rabbits were enough for dinner. They roasted the rabbits until crispy on the outside and tender inside, looking delicious. The youngest daughter, Kutan, eagerly grabbed a rabbit leg, enjoying the lean yet tender meat. Like most animals after summer, the rabbits were plump and tasty. Now, at the onset of winter, was the best time to catch them. Today's 2 rabbits were just the beginning, and they hoped to catch more in the future.